The crimson sun bathed the colossal arena in eerie purple light, casting long shadows across the blood-stained sand. Rick Summers stood at the center, chest heaving, sweat mingling with the alien dust that clung to his skin. The roar of the crowd, a cacophony of chittering, hissing, and thunderous stomping, echoed throughout the genetic arena of the Aerodanian Empire. Rick wiped blood from his brow. Not all of it his own. The massive body of Gorgolon, champion of the Draconian Quadrant, lay motionless at his feet. 6 arms, each ending in razor-sharp claws, now limp and useless. The creature's scaled chest no longer rose and fell with labored breaths. Rick had won. "The human survives!" The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, translated through the neural implant at the base of Rick's skull. For the first time in the history of the genetic selection games, a Terran advances to become a prime genetic specimen. Rick grimaced. He hadn't volunteered for this. None of the humans had. When the Aerodanian scout ships appeared in Earth's orbit 3 years ago, they hadn't come as conquerors or diplomats. They came as collectors, harvesters of genetic material from across the galaxy. Earth was simply their latest acquisition zone. Looking up at the royal box, Rick could see her, Queen Selena of Aerodania. Even from this distance, her otherworldly beauty was apparent. Skin the color of pale amethyst, hair like flowing silver that seemed to move with a life of its own, and eyes, 3 of them, that glowed with an inner light. She sat motionless, surrounded by her court, watching him with what he imagined was cold calculation. The guards approached, their exoskeletons whirring with each step. "Come, Terran," one of them commanded. "Her Majesty wishes to present you with the reproductive contract." Rick knew what that meant. Everyone did. The winners weren't just champions. They were breeding stock. As he was escorted through the labyrinthine corridors, beneath the arena, Rick's mind raced. He was a former Marine, trained for combat in hostile environments. But nothing had prepared him for being abducted and forced to fight in alien gladiatorial games. When the transport ship had taken him from his remote cabin in Alaska, he'd been in the middle of trying to forget the wars he'd fought in. Now he was thrust into an entirely new kind of battle. The throne room of the Aerodanian Palace was a marvel of crystalline architecture. Massive structures of what appeared to be diamond rose from the floor, twisting into impossible shapes before meeting at a vaulted ceiling hundreds of feet above. The entire chamber pulsed with subtle light, as if the building itself were alive and breathing. Queen Selena sat upon a throne that seemed to grow directly from the floor. Up close, Rick could see that her beauty was even more striking and more alien. Her facial features were almost human, yet subtly wrong in ways that made her both fascinating and unsettling. "Approach, Terran champion," she commanded, her voice musical yet edged with steel. Rick stepped forward, flanked by guards. He refused to bow. "You have proven the worth of your species' genetic material," Selena continued, seemingly unperturbed by his lack of deference. "As such, you are granted the honor of contributing to the royal bloodline of Aerodania." A crystalline tablet materialized in her hand, glowing with script in an alien language that his implant translated into floating text before his eyes. Reproductive contract. "This document outlines your duties," she explained. "You will provide genetic material on a schedule determined by our royal scientists. You will be housed in comfort in the subsidiary palace. You will want for nothing except freedom." Rick's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" A murmur rippled through the court. Selena's central eye narrowed slightly. "That option does not exist," she stated simply. "The contract is not a request. It is your reality now." She extended the tablet toward him. "Your thumbprint here will acknowledge receipt. Compliance is not optional." Rick reluctantly pressed his thumb to the glowing surface, knowing he had no choice. Not yet, anyway. "Take him to his quarters," the Queen commanded. "Begin the extraction protocols tomorrow." The subsidiary palace was a gilded cage. Rick's chambers were luxurious beyond anything he had experienced on Earth. A vast suite with floors of polished stone that shifted colors beneath his feet, furniture that adjusted to his body's contours automatically, and views of the alien capital city that stretched to the horizon. But the doors were locked. The windows, though they appeared to be open to the air, were actually impenetrable force fields. And every morning, medical drones would arrive to collect samples: blood, tissue, reproductive material. Sometimes they sedated him. Sometimes they didn't bother. After 3 weeks of this routine, Rick began to understand the patterns of the palace, the guard rotations, the weak points in security, the hierarchy among the servants who brought his meals, some of whom seemed sympathetic to his plight. It was one of these servants, Taryn, who finally spoke to him as more than a specimen. "They say you fought well," Taryn whispered as he set down Rick's evening meal. Taryn was Eridanian, but smaller than most, with only 2 eyes instead of 3, some kind of genetic variation that had apparently relegated him to servant status. "I fought to survive," Rick responded. "Not for glory." Taran glanced nervously at the door. "Do you know why they need your genetic material so desperately?" Rick leaned forward. "I assumed it was some kind of sick trophy collection." "No," Taran shook his head. "It's survival. The royal bloodlines, all Erodanians, really. We're dying. Centuries of inbreeding have weakened our genetic diversity. Each generation is smaller, weaker, with more defects." He gestured to his own face, to the space where a third eye should have been. "The games, the genetic harvesting from other species, it's all an attempt to save our race." Rick absorbed this information slowly. "So I'm not just a trophy. I'm medicine." "Your hope," Taryn corrected. "The Queen is desperate. Our population has declined by 40% in just 3 generations. But what?" Taryn leaned closer. "There are those who believe our blood should remain pure, even if it means our extinction. The purist party. They grow stronger every day, and they've infiltrated even the palace guard. They would rather see our species die out than be contaminated with alien genetics." Before Rick could ask more, the door slid open. Taryn straightened immediately, resuming his servile posture, and left without another word. That night, as Rick lay on his bed staring at the ceiling that mimicked the alien night sky, he made his decision. He wouldn't be a passive donor in this genetic experiment, no matter how desperate the Eridanians might be. There had to be a better way, one that didn't involve treating him like livestock. The next morning, when Queen Selena herself came to inspect the harvesting process, Rick was ready. As the medical drones approached with their needles and collection vials, he stood perfectly still. The Queen watched from the doorway, her 3 eyes studying him with clinical detachment. "Your genetic material has shown remarkable compatibility," she informed him. "The preliminary tests are promising. You should feel honored." Rick met her gaze steadily. "Honored to be a prisoner? To have my body violated without consent? Where I come from, Your Majesty, we call that a crime." Her expression didn't change. "Your human concepts are irrelevant here. The survival of my species supersedes your individual rights." "Does it?" Rick challenged. "And what happens when you've taken everything you need from me? What then?" For the first time, he saw a flicker of something. Discomfort, perhaps, cross her alien features. "You will be maintained in optimal condition for as long as your genetic material remains viable." "And then?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought," Rick said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crystalline tablet, the reproductive contract that had been given to him upon his arrival. He had managed to steal it back from its storage compartment during a momentary lapse in surveillance. "This contract," he said, holding it up, "treats me as property, not as a sentient being." With a sudden movement, he snapped the tablet in 2. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through the chamber. I reject it. The guards immediately raised their weapons, but Selena held up a hand to stop them. Her 3 eyes were wide with shock and something else. Was it fear? Respect? You destroy royal property and defy imperial decree, she said, her voice low and dangerous. The penalty is severe. Then do your worst, Rick replied. But know this, I won't be your breeding stock. If your species needs help, there are better ways to ask for it than abduction and forced extraction. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a slight gesture, she commanded, Take him to the laboratory. If he will not cooperate voluntarily, we will pursue more comprehensive solutions. As the guards seized him, Rick didn't resist. He had made his point. The first step in any rebellion was to establish that you were not already defeated. And as they dragged him away, he caught one last glimpse of Queen Selena's face. Her expression was troubled, thoughtful. Good, he thought. Let her think. The laboratory was a sterile nightmare of gleaming metal and pulsing organic technology. Rick was strapped to an examination table, surrounded by equipment whose purpose he could only guess at. Scientists, or what passed for them in Aerodanian society, moved around him, speaking in technical terms that his translator implant struggled to interpret. The comprehensive genetic extraction will begin once the Queen gives final approval, one of them said, adjusting something on a hovering display. The subject will not survive the procedure, but we will have complete access to all genetic material. Rick strained against his restraints. So that was the comprehensive solution: total extraction, death. Another scientist approached, this one older, with skin that had faded to a pale lavender. I must register my objection. Dr. Naren, he said. This is precisely the kind of procedure that the Ethical Genetics Convention prohibits. There are alternative methods that... Your objection is noted. Dr. Vex. Dr. Naren cut him off. But the Queen's orders are clear. The human's defiance has forced our hand. Has it? Dr. Vex countered. Or has it simply given us an excuse to do what the purists have wanted all along? Extraction without contamination? Dr. Naren's eyes narrowed. Be careful, Vex. Such talk borders on sedition. Before the argument could continue, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Red lights pulsed along the walls. What's happening? Dr. Naren demanded, turning to a console. Security breach in the East Wing, a mechanical voice responded. Purist insurgents have infiltrated the palace. The Queen is in danger. The scientists looked at each other in alarm. Secure the specimen, Dr. Naren ordered. We cannot allow it to be damaged in the attack. As they rushed to prepare the laboratory for lockdown, Rick saw his opportunity. In their haste, one of the scientists had failed to properly secure his right arm restraint. With careful, subtle movements, he began working his hand free while the chaos unfolded around him. The purist attack created the perfect distraction. By the time the laboratory staff realized Rick had escaped his restraints, he had already incapacitated 2 guards and armed himself with one of their weapons, a sleek, rifle-like device that hummed with energy. The human is loose, Dr. Naren shouted. But it was too late. Rick had sealed the laboratory doors, trapping the scientists inside, and was already moving through the corridors of the palace. The scene outside was chaos. The purist insurgents, Aerodanians who wore distinctive black armor with red symbols, were engaged in fierce combat with the royal guards. Bodies littered the crystalline floors, and the air was thick with energy discharges and the acrid smell of burned flesh. Rick ducked behind a column as a group of purists rushed past. His goal wasn't to join the battle but to escape in the confusion. Yet, as he made his way through the palace, following signs his implant translated as docking bay, he heard something that made him pause. A woman's scream, followed by the sound of struggle. Against his better judgment, Rick changed direction, following the sounds to a small antechamber. There, he found Queen Selena herself, cornered by 3 purist soldiers. Her royal guard lay dead at her feet, and though she wielded some kind of energy weapon, she was clearly outmatched. "The impure queen dies today," one of the purists snarled. "Your contamination program ends now." Rick didn't think. He acted on instinct, the way he had in countless combat situations on Earth. 3 quick bursts from his stolen weapon, and the purists collapsed, their armor smoking from perfect headshots. Selena stared at him in shock. "You saved me." "Don't read too much into it," Rick replied, already scanning for exit routes. "I'm not a fan of executions, even for royalty who imprisoned me." The queen straightened, her regal bearing returning. "The palace is overrun. The purists must have had inside help." She eyed him warily. "Why are you here? This would be your perfect chance to escape." "That's still the plan," Rick assured her. "Which way to the docking bay?" A loud explosion rocked the palace, and part of the ceiling collapsed nearby, blocking the corridor ahead. "That was the central docking bay," Selena said grimly. "They're destroying all means of escape." She hesitated, then made a decision. "There's another way out, through the royal sanctuary and down to the underground tunnels. They lead to the Northern Range Research Station." "And why would you tell me this?" Her 3 eyes met his gaze directly. "Because I'm coming with you. The purists will kill me if they find me. And—" She took a deep breath. "And perhaps I have been wrong about the methods we've employed. Your defiance. It made me question our approach." Rick studied her, looking for deception, but found only determination and a hint of fear. "Lead the way, Your Majesty, but don't think this makes us friends." "I would never presume such a thing," she replied with the ghost of a smile. Together, they moved through the less-traveled corridors of the palace, avoiding the main battle zones. Selena led them to a hidden passageway, behind what appeared to be a solid wall, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward. "The royal sanctuary," she explained as they descended. "Only the monarch and their chosen consorts are permitted here." The sanctuary was a vast chamber, dominated by a massive crystal throne that seemed to grow from the floor. Unlike the public throne room, this place felt ancient, primal. The walls were carved with symbols and images that depicted the history of Eridania, including, Rick noticed, what appeared to be earlier encounters with other alien species. "Your people have been collecting genetic specimens for a long time," he observed, pointing to one carving that clearly showed Eridanians taking captives from a world with 3 suns. "For generations," Selena acknowledged. "At first, it was about power, expanding our capabilities, enhancing our natural attributes. But as time passed, it became about survival." She approached the throne, placing her hand on a specific crystal facet. "The irony is that our pursuit of genetic perfection led to our undoing. By limiting breeding to only the purest bloodlines, we weakened ourselves." The floor behind the throne began to slide open, revealing another staircase, this one descending even deeper. "The tunnel entrance," she explained. "It will take us beneath the mountains to the research station." Before they could proceed, the main doors to the sanctuary burst open. A squad of purist soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. "Traitor Queen!" their leader shouted. "Conspiring with the alien contaminator!" Rick and Selena dived for cover as energy blasts scorched the air around them. Taking position behind a crystal column, Rick returned fire, dropping 2 of the attackers. "We need to reach the tunnel," Selena called to him, her own weapon firing with precision. "Once it seals, they cannot follow." Rick nodded. "Cover me!" As Selena laid down suppressive fire, Rick dashed from column to column, working his way closer to the purists. When he was within range, he launched himself at their leader, knocking the weapon from his hands and engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The Eridanian was stronger than a human, But Rick was trained in combat techniques the alien had never encountered. A precise strike to what he hoped was a vulnerable nerve cluster sent the purest commander crumpling to the ground. The remaining soldiers hesitated, suddenly uncertain without their leader. That moment of indecision was all Selena needed. Her weapon discharged a wide-angle blast that incapacitated the rest of the squad. Rick looked at her with new respect. "Nice shot." "I am a queen," she replied with dignity. "But I was a warrior first." They hurried to the tunnel entrance and began their descent. As they cleared the threshold, Selena activated a control panel, and the heavy stone door slid shut behind them, sealing with a resonant thud. "They will find other ways to pursue us," she warned as they continued downward. "But we have bought ourselves time." The tunnel was ancient, carved through solid rock, with bioluminescent fungi providing dim illumination. They walked in silence for a time, each processing the dramatic shift in their relationship, from captor and captive to reluctant allies. "Why did you save me?" Selena finally asked. "After what I did to you, what I planned to do, you could have left me to die." Rick kept walking, eyes forward. "I've seen enough death. Even enemies deserve better than execution." "Is that what I am to you, an enemy?" He glanced at her. "What would you call someone who abducts people, forces them to fight to the death, then harvests their bodies without consent?" She had no immediate answer for that. "But," Rick continued after a moment, "I'm starting to think you're not the real enemy here. The purists, this system you've built, those are the true threats. You're just trying to save your people, even if your methods are barbaric." "Our situation is desperate," Selena admitted. "But that is no excuse for what we've done." She hesitated. "What I've done. To you, and to others like you." It was the closest thing to an apology Rick expected to get. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger cavern system, where underground rivers had carved smooth pathways through the rock. The sound of rushing water echoed around them. "We need to follow this river downstream," Selena instructed. "It will lead us to an exit near the research station." As they made their way along the riverbank, Rick's enhanced hearing picked up sounds of pursuit, the clatter of armored footsteps, and the low hum of energy weapons. "They've found another way in," he warned. Selena nodded grimly. "There's a faster route, but it's risky." She pointed to what appeared to be some kind of hovering platform docked at the edge of the river. "A maintenance skiff. It can take us downstream much faster than we can walk, but the currents are treacherous." "I'll take treacherous currents over purist execution squads any day," Rick decided, moving toward the skiff. The vehicle was simple enough to operate. A flat, disc-shaped platform with a control column at its center. Selena quickly showed Rick the basics, and soon they were skimming along the surface of the underground river at high speed, the cool, damp air whipping past them. Behind them, energy blasts began to illuminate the cavern as their pursuers opened fire. "Faster!" Rick urged, taking a position at the rear of the skiff to return fire. Selena pushed the craft to its limits, navigating the increasingly rapid currents with skill born of desperation. The river began to descend more steeply, turning their ride into something more akin to a roller coaster as they plunged through narrow channels and around sharp bends. "Hold on!" Selena shouted as they approached a particularly steep drop. The skiff went airborne momentarily before crashing back onto the surface of the water, sending up a spray that momentarily blinded them both. When Rick's vision cleared, he saw that the pursuing purists had deployed their own skiffs and were gaining on them. Worse, the river ahead appeared to split into multiple channels. "Which way?" he called to Selena. She pointed to the rightmost channel. "That one leads to the exit. The others." "The others what?" "End in waterfalls. 100-meter drops onto rocks." Rick grimaced. "Lovely." As they approached the junction, an energy blast struck their skiff's propulsion system. The craft lurched violently, nearly throwing them both into the water. "We're losing control!" Selena shouted, wrestling with the steering column. The guidance system is damaged! Rick fired back at their pursuers, managing to hit one of the purest skiffs. It spun out of control and crashed into a cavern wall in a spectacular explosion. But their own craft was now drifting sideways, caught in the powerful current. Rick could see they were being pulled toward one of the deadly channels, not the safe route Selena had indicated. In a split-second decision, he threw himself at the control column, using his full body weight to wrench it toward the correct channel. The damaged skiff groaned in protest, but began to respond, gradually turning away from disaster. "We need more power," Selena cried, her hands moving rapidly over the control panel. "Can you reroute from the secondary systems?" Rick suggested, falling back on his military training in damaged vehicles. Selena's eyes widened. Yes, that might work." Her fingers danced across the controls, and suddenly, the craft surged forward with renewed energy, narrowly making the turn into the correct channel, just as another barrage of energy blasts tore through the air around them. The remaining purist skiffs attempted to follow, but misjudged the turn. Rick and Selena watched as their pursuers were swept into the deadly channels, their screams fading as they disappeared into the darkness. "That was," Selena began. "Lucky," Rick finished for her. "Very lucky." Their damaged skiff continued downstream, its propulsion system sputtering but functional. The river gradually widened and slowed, and eventually, they could see light ahead, the exit from the cavern system. They emerged into the open air on the far side of the mountain range. The twin moons of Eridania hung low in the purple sky, casting dual shadows across a landscape of twisted rock formations and sparse, alien vegetation. In the distance, perched on a plateau, stood their destination, the Northern Range Research Station. Its gleaming metal structures and communication towers stood in stark contrast to the rugged natural environment. "We made it," Selena breathed, relief evident in her voice. Rick guided their failing skiff to the shore, and they disembarked just as its propulsion system finally gave out completely. The craft sank slowly beneath the surface of the river. "It's still several kilometers to the station," Selena noted, surveying the terrain. "But we should be safe from immediate pursuit." As they began the trek across the alien landscape, Rick found himself studying the Queen with new eyes. In combat, facing a common enemy, she had shown courage, quick thinking, and a willingness to get her hands dirty. Not the traits he would have expected from a pampered monarch. "Your people at the research station," he asked, after they had walked in silence for some time. "Will they help us? Or are they loyal to the purists?" "The scientists there are loyal to knowledge, not politics," Selena replied. "And Dr. Callion, who oversees the facility, has long advocated for ethical genetic research. She opposed the breeding program in its current form, argued for voluntary participation rather than forced extraction." "Sounds like someone I'd get along with," Rick remarked. Selena cast him a sidelong glance. "Perhaps, though she might still want to study your DNA. Just with your consent this time." Rick couldn't help but laugh at that. At least she'd ask nicely. As they approached the research station, they could see signs of heightened security, force fields activated, guard patrols along the perimeter. News of the palace coup had clearly reached them. Selena led them to a less obvious entrance, a maintenance access point on the facility's eastern side. She placed her palm against a scanner, which beeped and flashed green. "My genetic signature still grants me access," she explained, as the door slid open. "Though I don't know how long that will last if the purists take control of the central systems." Inside, the research station was a marvel of advanced technology. Laboratories filled with equipment Rick couldn't begin to understand lined the corridors. In some rooms, he could see vast tanks containing what appeared to be developing embryos of various species. In others, holographic displays showed DNA structures rotating slowly in 3 dimensions. Selena moved with purpose, leading him toward what appeared to be a central command area. As they entered, The scientists and technicians inside froze, staring in shock at their queen, disheveled, armed, and accompanied by a human. "Your Majesty," one of them finally managed, dropping into a bow. "We received reports that the palace had fallen, that you were—" He trailed off. "Dead?" Selina finished for him. "The purists came close to succeeding. They may yet," she straightened, assuming her full regal bearing despite her bedraggled appearance. "Dr. Callion, I need your help." A tall, Aerodanian female stepped forward. Her skin was a deeper purple than most, and her silver hair was cropped short in what Rick assumed was a practical style for a scientist. "Of course, my queen," Dr. Callion replied, her eyes darting curiously to Rick. "And this is—" "Rick Summers," Selina introduced him. "A former genetic donor who has become an ally of necessity." "Former?" Dr. Callion raised what passed for an eyebrow. "I tore up the contract," Rick explained with a slight smile. "Literally." To his surprise, Dr. Callion actually looked amused. "I see. Well, any ally of the Queen is welcome here. But I must warn you both. We've received transmissions from the capital. The purists claim to have established a provisional government. They're calling for your capture, Your Majesty, and the elimination of all contaminated research." Selina's expression hardened. "They will not stop with me or with the research. Once they consolidate power, they will begin purging anyone they deem impure, which, given their extremism, could be half our population." "What are our options?" Rick asked, surprising himself with the "our." When had he started thinking of himself as part of the struggle? Dr. Callion activated a holographic display at the center of the room. It showed a map of the planet, with various locations highlighted. "We have allies," she explained. "Other research stations, military outposts where commanders remain loyal to the crown, civilian populations who oppose purist ideology. But they're scattered, uncoordinated." She looked to Selina. "They need a leader. My queen. They need you." Selina studied the map thoughtfully. "We need a plan, a way to counter the purist narrative and rally support. And we need a way to address the actual genetic crisis," Rick added. "Isn't that what started all this? If your people are facing extinction due to genetic bottlenecking, solving that problem might undercut the purists' support." Dr. Callion looked at him with newfound respect. "The human is correct. The purists offer only one solution: genetic purity at the cost of extinction. If we can present a viable alternative that preserves Aerodanian identity while ensuring our survival, we can win both the scientific and the political battle," Selina finished. For the next several hours, they worked feverishly to develop a two-pronged strategy. On the scientific front, Dr. Callion and her team outlined a new approach to genetic diversification, one based on voluntary contributions from compatible species, with targeted modifications to preserve essential Aerodanian traits while introducing needed diversity. On the political and military front, Selina used the research station's secure communication channels to contact loyal forces across the planet. The response was stronger than she had dared hope, while the purists had seized the capital. Their support elsewhere was limited. Many Aerodanians recognized the existential threat of genetic stagnation and were willing to consider alternatives to extinction. As the twin moons rose higher in the night sky, Rick found himself standing alone on an observation deck, looking out over the alien landscape. The events of the past days had been so intense, so focused on immediate survival, that he had barely had time to process the larger situation. He was light years from Earth, caught in the middle of an alien civil war, and somehow fighting on the side of the very queen who had imprisoned him. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Selina approaching. She had cleaned up and changed into more practical attire, a form-fitting uniform that resembled what the research staff wore, though hers was in royal colors. "Dr. Callion's team has made a breakthrough," she informed him, coming to stand beside him at the railing. They believe they can adapt our genetic stabilization technology to work with voluntary donations. No need for the complete extraction that was planned for you. That's good news, Rick replied cautiously. It is. She turned to face him directly. I want you to know that I truly am sorry for what was done to you. My desperation to save my people led me to justify actions that were unconscionable. Rick was silent for a long moment. I understand desperation, he finally said. I've seen what it can make people do. But understanding isn't the same as excusing. No, she agreed. It isn't. They stood in silence, looking out at the alien night. What will you do when this is over? Selena eventually asked. Assuming we succeed against the purists? Rick hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. Go home, I suppose. Back to Earth. Back to my cabin in Alaska, where no one bothers me. Is that truly what you want, isolation? He glanced at her. What else is there? Selena seemed to choose her next words carefully. Purpose, connection, the chance to be part of something meaningful. She gestured to the research facility around them. What we're doing here, it could change the course of my civilization. It could save my people without sacrificing our principles. And what role do you see for me in this brave new Eridania? Rick asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Whatever role you choose, she replied simply. Ambassador, advisor, or yes, genetic donor. But on your terms, with your consent, treated with dignity, rather than as a resource to be harvested. Before Rick could respond, an alarm blared throughout the facility. They both tensed, immediately alert. Security breach in Sector 7, a mechanical voice announced. Purist forces detected. They rushed back to the command center, where Dr. Callion was coordinating the defense. A small strike force, she reported as they entered. Probably an advance team sent to assess our defenses before the main assault. Or to assassinate the Queen, Rick suggested grimly. They likely tracked our route from the tunnels. Selena nodded in agreement. We need to evacuate the critical research and personnel. Dr. Callion, initiate protocol exodus. As the research staff scrambled to secure data and specimens, Rick joined the security team preparing to counter the purist infiltrators. He was given a more advanced weapon than the one he'd taken from the palace guard, a rifle-like device that the armory officer assured him was calibrated for human neural patterns. What does that mean exactly? Rick asked, as he hefted the weapon. It means it won't backfire and melt your brain, the officer replied matter-of-factly. Always good to know, Rick muttered. The purist strike force had breached the facility's outer defenses and was methodically working its way toward the central laboratories. Rick positioned himself with a squad of loyal Eridanian guards at a crucial junction, ready to ambush the attackers as they advanced. The firefight was intense but brief. The purists, though fanatical, were outmatched by the combined forces of the research station's security and Rick's combat experience. His ability to think unconventionally, to use tactics the Eridanians had never encountered, proved decisive. When the last purist attacker fell, Rick surveyed the battlefield with grim satisfaction. No casualties on their side, though several guards had sustained injuries. Your fighting style is unusual, commented the Eridanian security chief, an imposing figure named Krav. Effective, but strange to our eyes. Human military tactics, Rick explained, developed for different kinds of warfare than what you're used to. Krav nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps you could teach us. If we are to face a full purist assault, any advantage would be welcome. Rick found himself agreeing, and over the next days, as they prepared for the inevitable larger attack, he began training the station's security forces in human combat techniques. The Eridanians were quick learners, adapting Earth strategies to their own physiological advantages. Meanwhile, Selena and Dr. Callion made rapid progress on both the scientific and political fronts. The new genetic stabilization protocol was proving promising in initial tests, and support for the Queen was growing across the planet as news spread of the purist coup attempt and Selena's alternative vision. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session with the security forces, Rick was summoned to Dr. Callian's primary laboratory. He found Selena there as well, along with a team of scientists gathered around a holographic display. "We wanted you to see this," Dr. Callian said by way of greeting. "The results of the modified protocol." The display showed what appeared to be a developing embryo, though its features were still too indistinct for Rick to identify its species. "This is a hybrid," Selena explained, her voice containing a note of wonder. "Aerodanian-based genetics with selective incorporation of compatible alien DNA, including human DNA." Rick stared at the image. "You used my DNA for this? Without asking?" "No," Dr. Callian quickly corrected. "This is a simulation only, a proof of concept using genetic samples we already had in storage. We would never proceed with actual development without explicit consent." Rick relaxed slightly. "And this hybrid, it's viable." "More than viable," one of the other scientists chimed in excitedly. "The simulation shows enhanced immune response, improved cellular regeneration, and none of the degenerative markers that plague pure Aerodanian embryos. And most importantly, the essential Aerodanian traits, neural structure, basic morphology, psychic sensitivity, all remain intact." "In other words," Selena said, turning to Rick, "we can save our people without losing who we are, and we can do it ethically, with willing partners rather than captives." The implications were profound. If successful, this approach would undermine the purists' entire ideology. Why cling to genetic purity if it meant extinction, when genetic diversity could ensure survival while preserving Aerodanian identity? "There's something else you should see," Dr. Callian added, manipulating the holographic controls. The display shifted to show a different image, what appeared to be two DNA strands intertwining. "This is fascinating," she continued. "When we examined your genetic material more closely, we discovered something unexpected. Human and Aerodanian DNA have certain complementary structures, almost as if our species evolved to be compatible." "That's impossible," Rick objected. "Our worlds are light years apart. Our species evolved independently." "And yet the evidence is clear," Dr. Callian insisted. "The compatibility is too perfect to be coincidental. It suggests—" She hesitated, looking to Selena. "It suggests that our peoples may share a common ancestor," the Queen finished. "Far back in our evolutionary history. Perhaps even an ancient spacefaring civilization that seeded multiple worlds." Rick was skeptical, but the data on the display was compelling. If true, it would mean humans and Aerodanians were distant cousins of a sort, not the completely alien species they had assumed. Before he could fully process this revelation, the facility's alarms blared once again. But this time, the message was different. "Incoming transmission from the capital," the automated system announced. "Purist command to all settlements. Priority Alpha." They rushed to the command center, where the main screen displayed the face of the purist leader, an elderly Aerodanian male with features set in a mask of fanatical determination. "People of Aerodania," he began, his voice resonating with zealous conviction. "The time of purification is upon us. For too long, our royal bloodlines have flirted with contamination, weakening our genetic heritage with foreign elements. Today, we reclaim our destiny as the pure and perfect species we were meant to be." The camera pulled back to reveal that he stood in the palace throne room, surrounded by armed purist soldiers. "The traitor Queen Selena remains at large, conspiring with alien elements to pollute our bloodlines further. But her reign is over. I, High Commander Zorn, hereby assume leadership of the Provisional Pure Government of Aerodania." His eyes seemed to burn with inner fire as he continued. "To all citizens, you will present yourselves for genetic scanning. Those found to carry impure markers will be processed. Those with pure bloodlines will join us in rebuilding our glorious civilization. Processed, Rick repeated grimly. Genocide by any other name. Selena's face had gone pale. They're going to slaughter millions of my people. Anyone with even minor genetic variations. The transmission continued, with details of the purification protocols to be implemented across the planet. It was a blueprint for mass murder on an unimaginable scale. As the transmission ended, the command center erupted into frantic activity. Reports began flooding in from across the planet, purist forces mobilizing, loyal military units preparing to resist, civilian populations in panic. "We need to act now," Selena declared, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The time for preparation is over." She turned to Dr. Callion. "Is the research secure? The new protocols?" The scientist nodded. "All data has been backed up to secure locations across the planet. Even if this facility falls, the work will continue." "Good." Selena then addressed Krav, the security chief. "What forces can we muster for an immediate counteroffensive?" Krav brought up a tactical display. "The research station's security complement, plus loyal military units from 3 nearby outposts. Perhaps 2,000 troops total, but the purists control the capital and the main military installations. They outnumber us significantly." Rick studied the tactical display, his military training kicking in. "Numbers aren't everything," he said. "The purists are spread thin trying to implement their purification across the entire planet. Their forces at any single location, including the capital, must be limited." "A surgical strike," Krav mused, following Rick's thinking. "Hit them at their center while they're focused on the periphery." "Exactly," Rick confirmed. "Cut off the head, and the body dies. We take out High Commander Zorn and the purist leadership. We might be able to end this before the mass killings begin." Selena looked from Rick to Krav and back again. "Can it be done?" Rick didn't sugarcoat the truth. "It's high risk. We'd need perfect intelligence on their positions, a stealthy approach, and probably a healthy dose of luck. But it's better than waiting for them to consolidate power and complete their genocide." The Queen was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. Then, with regal authority, she made her decision. "Prepare the assault force. We move on the capital." The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. Intelligence was gathered from loyal agents still within the capital. Transport vessels were prepared. Weapons were distributed and tactics rehearsed. Through it all, Rick found himself at the center of the planning. His human military experience providing perspectives the Aerodanians had never considered. Guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, concepts that were relatively undeveloped in Aerodanian military doctrine, but that might prove decisive against the numerically superior purists. As the final preparations were being made, Selena sought Rick out in the armory, where he was checking his equipment one last time. "Dr. Callion tells me you volunteered to lead the advance team," she said without preamble. Rick nodded, not looking up from his weapon. "I'm the most experienced in this kind of operation." "It's also the most dangerous position," Selena pointed out. "The first team in has the highest casualty rate." Now, Rick did look at her, a hint of a smile on his face. "Worried about your genetic specimen, Your Majesty?" She flinched slightly at the reminder of how their relationship had begun. "Worried about a valued ally," she corrected. "And a friend." The word hung in the air between them, unexpectedly significant. Rick's expression softened. "I'll be careful, but someone has to go first, and I'm the best qualified." Selena nodded, accepting his decision. "There's something else. Dr. Callion has completed the analysis of the genetic compatibility between our species. It's even more remarkable than we initially thought." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "In theory, natural reproduction between humans and Aerodanians would be possible. Difficult, but possible. The offspring would be viable." Rick wasn't sure how to respond to that. That's interesting scientific information, but why tell me now, right before a high-risk mission? Because I want you to understand what we're fighting for, Selena replied. Not just the survival of my species, but the possibility of something new. A future where our peoples don't just coexist, but can truly integrate. Where the barriers between us and them begin to dissolve. That's a pretty radical vision for someone who was running a forced breeding program a week ago, Rick observed, though without rancor. I have had my eyes opened, she admitted. By you, by Dr. Callion, by this crisis. I see now that the old ways, the isolation, the purity obsession, the treating of other species as resources, they lead only to stagnation and death. She stepped closer to him. We need to embrace change, diversity, connection. It's the only way forward. Rick held her gaze, seeing the genuine conviction in her 3 eyes. Let's make sure we have a chance at that future, then, he said simply. Let's win this fight first. The assault on the Capitol began under the cover of darkness. Rick led a team of 12 Aerodanian Special Forces operatives, all volunteers who had trained intensively with him over the past days. Their mission was to infiltrate the palace through the same tunnel system Rick and Selena had used to escape, secure the throne room, and capture or eliminate the Purist leadership. Meanwhile, Selena would command the main force in a frontal assault on the palace perimeter, a distraction to draw attention away from Rick's infiltration team. The journey through the tunnels was tense but uneventful. The Purists, arrogant in their control of the Capitol, had failed to secure this vulnerability. Rick's team emerged into the royal sanctuary to find it deserted. So far, so good, he whispered to his second-in-command, an Aerodanian female named Tella, who had proven particularly adept at human-style tactics. Now for the hard part. They moved silently through the palace corridors, encountering only minimal resistance. Most of the Purist forces were responding to Selena's diversionary attack on the perimeter, just as planned. As they approached the throne room, however, Rick sensed a trap. It was too easy. The corridors were too empty, the advance too smooth. He signaled the team to halt, then motioned for Tella to use her scanner, a device that could detect life forms through walls. She did so, then looked at Rick with alarm. Multiple signatures in the throne room, she whispered. At least 30. And... She adjusted the scanner. Energy readings consistent with heavy weapons. An ambush. Somehow, the Purists had anticipated their approach. Perhaps they had a spy in the research station, or perhaps they had simply guessed that an infiltration through the tunnels would be the logical tactic. Rick weighed their options. Retreat was possible, but would mean abandoning the mission. Proceeding into the trap would likely mean death for most, if not all, of his team. There had to be a third option. He gathered his team in a secure alcove and outlined a new plan. Risky, but with a chance of success. Instead of entering the throne room directly, they would split into 3 groups. One would create a diversion in a different part of the palace. Another would access the environmental control systems and fill the throne room with a non-lethal but disabling gas that Dr. Callion had provided for just such a contingency. The third group, led by Rick, would then enter from an unexpected direction, through the ceremonial skylight above the throne. It was a desperate plan, hastily conceived, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The team dispersed to their assigned tasks. Rick, along with Tella and 2 others, made their way to the upper levels of the palace, where they could access the massive skylight that dominated the throne room ceiling. Positioned above the unsuspecting Purists, Rick watched through the transparent crystal as his diversion team succeeded in drawing away nearly half the ambush force. Then, as the gas began to fill the throne room below, he gave the signal. They crashed through the skylight in a shower of crystal shards, descent lines allowing them to drop directly into the center of the throne room. The remaining purists, already disoriented by the gas, were caught completely by surprise. The fighting was chaotic and brutal. Rick's team had the advantage of gas masks and the element of surprise. But the purists had numbers and desperation on their side. Energy weapons discharged, lighting up the throne room with flashes of destructive power. Hand-to-hand combat erupted as the range closed. Rick fought his way toward the throne itself, where High Commander Zorn directed the defense, shouting orders through a protective mask of his own. The purist leader was no mere politician. He moved with the precision and skill of a trained warrior, cutting down one of Rick's team members with a sweeping energy blade. As Rick closed in on Zorn, he found himself facing a final defender, a massive Eridanian warrior wielding dual energy blades. The guard attacked with ferocious speed, forcing Rick to retreat, parrying desperately with his own weapon. A wild swing nearly took Rick's head off. He ducked, feeling the heat of the energy blade pass millimeters from his scalp. Off balance, he stumbled, and the guard pressed the advantage, raising both blades for a killing blow. The attack never landed. A precise energy blast struck the guard from behind, sending him crashing to the floor. Rick looked up to see Selena standing in the doorway, weapon raised, the main assault force pouring in behind her. Their eyes met across the chaos of battle, a moment of connection amid the violence. Then, Rick turned back to his target. High Commander Zorn was attempting to escape through a side passage. With a burst of speed, Rick cut him off, cornering the purist leader against the crystal throne. "Surrender," Rick demanded, his weapon trained on Zorn's chest. "It's over." Zorn's face contorted with hatred. "It will never be over, alien. Our blood remains pure, even if impure hands rule." With surprising speed for his age, he raised a small device, some kind of detonator. Rick fired without hesitation, his shot striking Zorn's hand, sending the detonator flying. Before the purist leader could recover, Rick was on him, pinning him to the ground, disarming him completely. "I said it's over." As the last pockets of resistance were subdued, Selena approached the throne, her throne, and surveyed the scene. The fighting had been costly. Several of Rick's team lay dead or wounded, as did many of the purists. But the objective had been achieved. The purist leadership was captured, the palace secured. Selena looked down at the restrained form of High Commander Zorn. "You will stand trial for treason, for attempted genocide, for crimes against the Eridanian people," she informed him, her voice cold with controlled rage. "And you will watch as we save our species through the very diversity you feared." Zorn spat at her feet. "Better extinction than contamination." "That was never the choice," Selena replied. "That was the false dichotomy you used to seize power." She turned away from him, addressing the loyalist forces, now filling the throne room. "Secure the prisoners, treat the wounded, ours and theirs alike, and send word across the planet. The purist coup has failed. Queen Selena has returned." The aftermath of the battle saw a flurry of activity throughout the capital. Purist forces, learning of their leadership's capture, largely surrendered without further resistance. Those that continued to fight were quickly overwhelmed by the combined forces of the loyalists and the civilian population, who rose up against the purists once news of the Queen's return spread. In the days that followed, Selena moved quickly to implement the new genetic protocols developed by Dr. Callion. Public announcements explained the true nature of the genetic crisis facing Eridania and outlined the ethical, voluntary approach that would replace the forced extraction program. To Rick's surprise, the response from the Eridanian population was overwhelmingly positive. Most had known, on some level, that their species was in trouble. The declining birth rates, the increasing genetic defects, these were impossible to hide completely. And while the purists had offered only extinction with dignity, Selena now offered survival with honor. A week after the recapture of the palace, Rick found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The signs of battle were still visible in places. Damaged buildings, makeshift memorials to the fallen. But life was returning to normal. Or rather, to a new normal. Selina joined him, dressed now in full royal regalia for the first time since their escape. The silken robes and crystalline crown should have created distance between them, returned her to the untouchable monarch he had first encountered. Instead, Rick found that he could still see the warrior who had fought beside him, the ally who had saved his life, the woman who had admitted her mistakes and found a better path. "The first volunteers arrived today," she told him, leaning on the balcony railing beside him. "Other species willing to participate in the genetic diversity program, all treated with dignity, all fully informed, all compensated fairly. No abductions, no forced combat, no extraction contracts?" Rick asked, though he already knew the answer. "Never again," Selina promised. "We've learned that lesson at great cost." They stood in companionable silence, watching the twin moons rise over the alien cityscape. "Your ship is prepared," Selina eventually said, her voice carefully neutral. "As promised, it can return you to Earth whenever you wish to leave." Rick had been expecting this conversation. He had achieved his freedom, helped end the purest threat, and secured a better future for the captives of the genetic program. His mission, such as it was complete. It was time to go home. And yet, "What if I didn't leave?" he asked, surprising himself almost as much as Selina, whose three eyes widened. "You would stay, voluntarily?" Rick turned to face her fully. "There's work to be done here. The new genetic program needs oversight to ensure it remains ethical. The military could use training in human tactics in case the purists regroup. And the cultural exchange. Humans learning about Eridanians. Eridanians learning about humans. That's barely begun." Selina studied him, hope and caution warring in her expression. "Those are all excellent reasons to stay. But are they your reasons, Rick Summers?" He smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've found something here I didn't have back on Earth." "And what is that?" "Purpose. Connection." He echoed her own words back to her. "The chance to be part of something meaningful." Selina's expression softened. "And is that all you found?" Rick hesitated, then took a step closer to her. "No, that's not all." Their first kiss was awkward. A meeting of anatomies never designed to connect in this way. But it was also electric. A crossing of boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "The court will be scandalized," Selina murmured, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. "Let them talk," Rick replied. "We're making history anyway. Might as well give them something really interesting to gossip about." 6 months later, the announcement that rocked Eridanian society came not from the palace, but from the Northern Range Research Station, where Dr. Callion personally confirmed what many had already begun to suspect. Queen Selina was with child. A hybrid child, the first of its kind. Half Eridanian, half human. The news spread across the planet and beyond. Some were shocked, some were outraged, but many, especially the younger generations, were fascinated and even inspired. The queen, who had once presided over a program of forced genetic extraction, was now embodying the very diversity she advocated, carrying the living proof that different species could come together, not just in clinical laboratories, but in love. Rick, now officially designated as Royal Consort, a title he accepted with good-humored embarrassment, found himself at the center of a cultural revolution. Human representatives began arriving on Eridania. Diplomats, scientists, cultural attachés, all eager to establish relations with this suddenly accessible alien civilization. And Eridanian envoys made the journey to Earth, beginning the long process of building understanding between the worlds. The purists, of course, did not disappear overnight. Extremism rarely dies easily. But their power was broken. their ideology increasingly seen as a relic of a desperate past, rather than a vision for the future. The future, it seemed, belonged to those willing to embrace change, diversity, and connection. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the palace gardens, Selena took Rick's hand and placed it on her slightly rounded abdomen. "Dr. Callian says the development is perfect," she told him. "All vital signs strong. A perfect fusion of our genetic heritages." Rick marveled at the miracle growing beneath his palm. "Boy or girl?" he asked. Selena laughed. "Neither, exactly. Aerodanian gender expression is more complex than human binary categories. But the closest equivalent in your terminology would be female." "A princess, then," Rick mused. "A bridge between worlds." "The first of many." "I hope," Selena replied, leaning against him. "The beginning of a new chapter for both our peoples." As the twin moons rose in the purple sky, casting dual shadows across the alien landscape, Rick reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From captive to consort, from enemy to ally to lover, from a solitary cabin in Alaska to the heart of an interstellar cultural revolution. The contract that had once bound him had been torn to shreds, both literally and figuratively. In its place had grown something far more powerful, a bond freely chosen, a future freely embraced. And as the stars emerged in the alien sky, some of them perhaps shining on other worlds, waiting to join this new coalition of species, Rick Summers, once a reluctant genetic specimen, now found himself exactly where he needed to be. Not a prisoner of fate, but an architect of possibility. The alien queen had indeed assumed he was all talk. But in tearing up that contract, he had helped write a new one, not just for himself, but for two civilizations and all that would come after.